Good evening, this is Viewpoint. I'm Zakka. Jacob. The first BRICS summit since the fall of Afghanistan to the Taliban is happening right now, and this year's BRICS is going to be even more fascinating and will be drawn into sharp focus simply because Russia and China are very clear that they are not just willing to engage with the Taliban, they're perhaps very happy to do business with the Taliban. They continue to be two big countries whose embassies, whose missions in Afghanistan were never shut through the course of this regime change. India, on the other hand, it's throwing its weight as far as the question of Afghanistan is concerned, certainly behind the US and other Western democracies on how to deal with this new Taliban regime. But India is also wary of being squeezed out of the room, of being elbowed out of the room, as may be evidenced over the last few weeks or so in the rapidly changing developments in Afghanistan. The question is this, and this is going to be drawn in sharp focus in that virtual meeting room right now, where Prime Minister Modi is meeting his counterparts from Russia, China, Brazil, and of course South Africa. Can India meet Russia and China in some measure on this Afghan question? That's going to be our big focus, but first, the story so far.
Namaskar.
All right, a large part of the time in this BRICS summit will be occupied by events that are playing out in Afghanistan. Here are India's concerns and, of course, commonalities when it comes to Afghanistan. Number one priority for India, of course, is combating terror activities and terror financing. In fact, you heard the Prime Minister a moment ago saying that the counter-terror module has been adopted. Channeling aid under the BRICS Development Bank. This is going to be another critical area. Remember, the Russians and the Chinese are keen that the BRICS Bank lends money to Afghanistan, lends aid to Afghanistan. Checking terror from Taliban-controlled areas. This is a total red line as far as India is concerned. Let's see how the Russians and the Chinese respond to that. For India, accepting that, yes, the Taliban is a reality, the Taliban government is a reality in Kabul, but India is in no mood, at least not at this stage, for any kind of formal recognition or diplomatic relationship with the new regime in Kabul. Meanwhile, in his opening remarks, Prime Minister Modi said that the counter-terrorism plan has been adopted by all 5 BRICS members.
यह भी पहली बार हुआ कि ब्रिक्स ने मल्टीलेटरल सिस्टम की मजबूती और सुधार इस पर एक साझा पोजीशन ली। हमने ब्रिक्स काउंटर टेररिज्म एक्शन प्लान भी एडॉप्ट किया है। हमारी अंतरिक्ष एजेंसियों के बीच रिमोट सेंसिंग सैटेलाइट कॉन्स्टेलेशन समझौते से सहयोग का एक नया अध्याय शुरू हो रहा है। हमारे कस्टम्स विभागों के बीच सहयोग से इंट्रा ब्रिक्स व्यापार आसान होगा। एक वर्चुअल नेटवर्क के रूप में ब्रिक्स वैक्सीनेशन अनुसंधान और विकास केंद्र शुरू करने पर भी सहमति बनी है।
In their opening comments, none of the leaders referred to Afghanistan, not even once, but surely once the media is out and once the closed-door discussions begin, Afghanistan will occupy a disproportionate amount of time. Joining me now, Vishnu Prakash, former diplomat in the Ministry of External Affairs. Suhasini Haider is the diplomatic editor of the Hindu newspaper. Praveen Swami is group consulting editor with Network 18. And Andrew K.P. Liang is an independent China strategist joining us from Hong Kong. Let me start with you, Mr. Prakash. It is fascinating for me, this BRICS summit, because it's very clear. The events of the last few days have made it very clear that the Russians and the Chinese are very happy to do business with the Taliban. In fact, the Chinese government spokesperson, in fact, referred to it as the end of anarchy. India, of course, has its own red lines when it comes to Afghanistan. The question is, in that room where the discussions are happening right now, what leverage does India have with Russia and China to say, okay, we may not be as important a player or we may not have as much leverage as you guys have in Afghanistan, but here are our red lines and these can't be crossed?
Good evening, Zakka. The fact remains, if I were to be candid, that China and Russia on one hand and India on the other, we are literally poles apart, especially with China. China has been mentoring Taliban now. They are likely to steer the recognition process of Taliban, and India has major concerns. So the shots are being called by China and Pakistan, and to an extent Russia. India does not have, to be honest, much of a role. For us, it is to wait and watch, see whether there is any way we can at least establish a line of communication with the Taliban, because the Doha faction or the Doha group that we were speaking to has clearly been sidelined, and the the old Taliban is back, especially the Haqqani group, which is out and out a terror group, and literally the who's who of the terrorists, somebody sanctioned by the UN, somebody by the US are there. So it's a tough test for India, it's a tough call, and I think we cannot take any step in a hurry.
All right, Suhasini Haidar, you know, this emerging fault line, as it were, Russia, China on the one side, and whether we like it or not, US, India is being seen in the same box. Certainly the Russians and the Chinese see India firmly in the US corner. This is going to shape not just, you know, responses to what is happening in Afghanistan. This is going to shape, you know, whether it is Indo-Pacific and Quad. This is going to shape new technology and how to deal with it. This is going to shape, you know, reforms in multilateral institutions. Really the question, though, before us and what confronts us is, how long are we going to sort of do this balancing act, say, oh, we are not in the US corner, we are still, you know, independent, and we're still, I know non-aligned is not a nice word these days, but, you know, we are pursuing India's interests. But the fact is, the whole world, and including Russia and China, and in particular Russia and China, view us very much in the American corner.
You know, a lot to unpack there, Zakka, but I will certainly say that regardless of where India's interests lie in the world today, India's geography has not changed. The fact that Afghanistan is at India's borders, at its frontiers, cannot change. The fact that Pakistan and China are both countries that India has issues with at the line of actual control and LOC has not changed. So I don't think India can take the positions that other countries in other parts of the world do, disconnected from geography, as it were. When you say that India is already in one camp or the other, I would like to ask how. In fact, if anything, US, Russia, and China took part in Troika plus talks on Afghanistan with Pakistan for more than 2 years. They had 6 rounds of talks. They seem to be very much on the same page, much more than India was, which was cut out of every regional dialogue that was held on Afghanistan till the very end.
But you don't think the view in Beijing or the view in Moscow, at least now, or not just on Afghanistan, which is why I expanded this, the view in Beijing and Moscow is that New Delhi is very much in the American corner? You don't think that?
You know, at this particular moment, it doesn't matter what China thinks, given the situation at the line of actual control. In fact, you know, we should be wondering how it is that more than a year after the Chinese transgressions of the line of actual control, we're still sitting equanimously today at the BRICS summit. The Prime Minister has hosted Chinese President Xi Jinping. In a week from now, the Prime Minister will take part in the SCO summit as well. With Chinese President Xi Jinping. Now, the truth is that India is still very much part of BRICS, still very much part of the SCO, is going to be on the SCO contact group in Afghanistan. External Affairs Minister Jaishankar is going to go and sit over there with China, with his Chinese counterparts, his Russian counterparts, Central Asian and Pakistani counterparts. And then after that, the Prime Minister Modi will travel for the Quad.
No, which is a great thing.
India has lost,
which is a great thing.
Its strategic autonomy.
I'm not disputing that. I'm saying it's better to be in the room than outside of it, as was evidenced in the whole, you know, negotiations that happened around Afghanistan. That's.
I think the question is, Zakka, are we putting our feet in 2 separate boats, or are we falling short?
How long can we do that?
Stools?
How long can we do that?
Just remember, at the end, when it came to the situation in Afghanistan, India was on neither side, in a sense.
Exactly.
Russia, China, Pakistan, Iran, Turkey and Qatar maintained their embassies. US and its allies moved to Doha. They haven't yet said that they're shutting down their missions. They've just moved their missions to Doha. India was the only one that seemed to be completely cut out, not allowed to hold, to keep its embassy at the airport as some of its
No,
what you are referring to as allies there.
You are reinforcing my point. I mean, we tried to walk on with 1 feet on each boat for a very long time on the question of Afghanistan, on the question of engaging with the Taliban. And Praveen, look where it got us. We are not in the room now. We have zero leverage with this new regime in Afghanistan. And Suhasini is right. I mean, the Americans are, God knows, 35,000 miles away. We are here. And we have nothing in terms of leverage with the emergent government there in Afghanistan. So I come back to the question, how long can India pretend to have 1 feet in each boat?
Well, I don't think India has been pretending that at all. It made a very clear decision quite some time ago not to have a foot in the boat as far as outreach to the Taliban was concerned. And I'm not sure putting a foot in that boat would have got us very far, honestly. You just have to go through the list of the Taliban's ministers to see that many of them have relationships with Pakistan's ISI and with the Pakistani military establishment dating back decades, not just years. Many of their families, close ones, sources of funding continue to be in Pakistan. Some actually run seminaries in Pakistan.
And to expect that just because we had a diplomatic outreach to them, we would have some influence is, in my view, has an element of fantasy to it. I think the reality is that we are going to be confronted with a hostile government in Kabul for some length of time to come. That whether or not we reach out to them diplomatically, that relationship is not going to change.
No, the larger question, sorry I'm interrupting, but the larger question is whether we like it or not, Praveen, let's broaden the discussion from Afghanistan. Whether we like it or not, the view in Moscow and the view in Beijing is very, very clear. India is not a non-aligned country as they view it. India is now very much in the American corner. It's up to us to say, okay, let's shed our pretense.
It's not really, I think, for either China or Russia to be the determinants of what India chooses to do, given the corner that we are in. I think that Russia and China have pursued their compelling national interests as they see it, which was to get the United States out of the region. India, that was not in India's interest and does not remain in India's interest. And I'm not sure how stable this situation is going to be.
Okay.
Having got the United States out of the region, I suspect we are already seeing a change of language in Iran. Mm-hmm. I think a number of things will happen which will push Russia away from this little romance which broke out for a few years. And I honestly think the best thing to do is for India to cultivate the relationships it developed over these years with a fairly wide swathe of opinion in Afghanistan.
All right.
Because I do not think the Taliban are going to have a smooth or an easy ride of it.
We'll see. Those could be either, that could be the greatest prediction ever made or famous last words. We'll see. But Andrew Leung, I think the only point of convergence now, at least at this point of time when it comes to Afghanistan, between Russia, China on the one hand and India, is that none of these three countries want Afghanistan to be a source for terror that emanates from Afghanistan but targets their respective countries or their boundaries or their geographies, whether it is India in the case of Kashmir with these Pakistan-based groups, or whether it is China with the Xinjiang stuff and ETIM, or even whether it is Russia with the Chechen question. Can that singular sort of common interest for all of these three countries, can that be reason enough to find some convergence in Afghanistan?
Well, naturally, there is a lot of common ground in spite of the inbuilt rivalry or confrontation between India and China. There's a lot of common ground in terms of having a key state in the neighborhood, which is stable, which does not harbor terrorism. So, in fact, this common ground applies to the United States as well. And even though they have left, they want the region to be stable. They don't want it to be turned into a hotbed of terrorism. So again, there is a lot of common ground.
How is that objective, Mr. Leung? How is that objective met when the Chinese formally recognize this Taliban government? The ambassador has met them. I think there was this big meeting with Wang Yi a few weeks ago. And today there are, what, 4, if not 5, UN-sanctioned terrorists in this Taliban government in Kabul. How is that objective met, even from China's point of view?
Well, of course, sanctions haven't worked. As you can see, that after 20 years of military occupation, military coercion, it hasn't worked. We're talking about a failed state that needs rebuilding. That means building much needed infrastructure and also the construction of necessary institutions and helping people's livelihood. And also building.
Is it your case, Mr. Liang, that the world tried sanctioning these terrorists, it did not work? Now let's co-opt them. Is that the case you're making?
What I'm saying, that sanctions alone won't work. I mean, that's the fact. So you need to work and build how to build a stable state, and there's a lack of infrastructure, and the whole country is now in shambles, and the people's livelihood is in tatters.
So China does not have qualms, even notwithstanding the whole Xinjiang question and the Itim question. China does not have qualms dealing with a terror regime, or at least members of this regime who are UN-sanctioned terrorists.
Well, of course, China has been on the receiving end of terrorism in Xinjiang and various other areas. But China doesn't deal with this problem only by sanctions. It's really wanting to build a more stable state.
All right. I want to play out, I think all 5 leaders have made their opening comments, and Vladimir Putin is the only head of state/government to refer to Afghanistan in his opening comments. So let's play that out, and then I'll come back to our guests.
US and its allies' withdrawal from Afghanistan has led to a new crisis, and it's still unclear how this will affect regional and global security. Evidently, Russia, just like its BRIC partners, has consistently spoken for establishing a long-awaited peace and stability on the Afghan soil. We are for Afghans living in peace and dignity on their soil.
All right. So, Vishnu Prakash, I mean, Vladimir Putin, they're saying we are for peace. Afghans need to live in peace, which is all fine. I don't think the events on the ground are quite playing that way. If you look at the protests and the pictures that are coming in from Kabul and other places, the larger question is this. Today in this meeting, for example, if Russia and China, and we know there has been some chatter around this, say, okay, we have this BRICS development bank, we've got a few $1 million there, we'd like to give that as aid or grants to Afghanistan. What would India's position be?
I would think that India will not be comfortable with that, because we have not reached the stage where we should be starting to give developmental assistance to the Taliban. And let's not forget, as you said, that these are all people, or most of them are people who are in the UN list of international terrorists. So the time for developmental assistance is certainly not there in India's point of view. Yes, if it's a question of humanitarian assistance, and that too which can go at least partly to the people of Afghanistan, because Taliban will certainly not allow you to go to the ground, go to the villages and towns and distribute aid. So humanitarian assistance, perhaps yes, but developmental assistance, certainly no.
Okay.
And Zakka, the other point that you were raising about the fact that the world is ready to deal with these people, the fact is that expediency and not principles guide decisions of the nations. Today, the world has recognized or have figured out that they cannot handle the Taliban, and therefore you're making peace with them. So that is quite evident.
Yep, I agree with you. No, I want to come back to Suhasini. I mean, I think this divergence between Russia, China on the one hand, and India and other Western democracies was absolutely in ample evidence when the UNSC vote happened a few days ago. So given that divergence, I mean, Russia and China both abstained, and India was the rotating chair of the Security Council. Given that divergence, what commonality can they agree on in this room where the BRICS summit is happening now?
Okay, so where are the points of divergence? Both of them have been in talks with the Taliban. Both of them, in fact, the US, more than Russia and China, had an actual Doha agreement that agreed to having these intra-Afghan talks to bring the Taliban into some kind of power situation. May not have been the situation they see today. Where they are disagreeing, and that's where I make the point that India is still sorting out where its position is, for example, Russia and China wanted ISIL or ISIS and ETIM, the Uyghur group, East Turkestan Islamic Movement, to be named specifically in the 1267, a paragraph on that. The U.S. doesn't want it because the U.S. has now delisted ETIM because of its own tensions with China and all the rest of that. Russia and China say they don't want to see mass evacuations from Afghanistan, whereas the U.S. has already taken out 124,000 people. Russia says this is adding to Afghanistan's brain drain. On both these issues, frankly, where is India's position? India would be okay with the naming of all of these terror groups because India adheres to UN sanction list, not to the US's sanction list. And India has, in fact, been very conservative on its own evacuations from Afghanistan. Only 565 people evacuated, of which only 112 were actually Afghan citizens, of which 70 were Sikh and Hindu minorities who have long-term visas to India anyway. And then there was the differences between them about the timing of the resolution. What I'm trying to say here, Zakka, is India must and does have a unique position when it comes to Afghanistan, when it comes to most of these issues on which U.S. and its allies and Russia and China, on the other hand, are divided. And India cannot afford to fall into one category or
the
another.
other. All right,
Praveen, as this balances, it will continue.
Praveen, I'll give you the final word. Here's what is fascinating for me. I mean, the UN resolution that happened, the points of divergence, I mean, if you look at it, yes, the devil was in the detail. But look at the larger picture. There is a fundamental problem that confronts India. I don't think India is in any position now to either recognize the Taliban regime or to have any kind of formal diplomatic ties. The only point of interest up until, the Deepak Mittal meeting happened was evacuation of more Indians and perhaps other Afghans who may want to come to India. Beyond that, where is the common ground with China and Russia?
Very little. I mean, look, the reality is that this sort of great expansion of Indian goodwill, Indian presence in Afghanistan came on the back of the American involvement. India had no great sort of equities or stakes there through the years of Mujahideen and then Taliban.
We had Bollywood.
We had, excuse me.
We had Bollywood.
We had Bollywood, but that may have won us some love in people's living rooms. It did not win us a great deal of geopolitical heft. The interesting thing is going to be actually whether China and Russia are actually willing to step up to base and do what the United States was doing over there. And there I'm not very persuaded. I mean, there was all this talk of China being willing to be the backbone of Afghanistan's economy. Well, even in much better years, they did nothing to develop their copper mining rights in Messainak.
All right.
They were supposed to build roads and railways. They did nothing. I'm not sure how much this is going to add up to, and I don't think India should go, jumping in a hurry.
I tell you what, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the initial figure that I saw, which is primarily humanitarian aid, which the Chinese are willing to commit, was 30 billion. But let's see, when it comes to coughing up cash, I don't think any figure you can put it past China. But let's be very, very clear about the big picture. I'm very clear. I think this fault line of U.S. and countries that are perceived to be U.S.'s friends or allies or partners are going to be on the one side, and you're going to see Russia and China. It's essentially a great power competition between the United States and China. Where we are seen in that may not necessarily depend on our own choices. It's also how it's viewed from different capitals. I'm going to thank you for this fascinating conversation. I'll catch you again at 9 o'clock with Brass Tacks.